I work in the developer and platform group, and we work with a lot of technical audiences, technical folk who are building apps in general. Generally, with the techie side of things, we kind of lend devices and do help on the technical side. But I'm not going to go into that tonight, because half the time the discussions that we have with folks is about how do they make money with apps. Like if these guys are doing startups, they want to know how they can make the most money. So I thought I'd go through some of the kind of trends that you look at if you're actually trying to make money. There's some very specific things that seem to be happening in the app world that particularly mean that you might make more money or less money. First of all, for anyone who's actually tried to do this, you've probably looked it up online, and there's maybe, if I could summarize 6 ways that you might be able to make money by making apps. One set are all direct ways, like you could charge for your app. You could have in-app purchases or subscriptions. That's how the gaming companies do it, if anyone has ever played Candy Crush, you know all about that. Or somebody can pay you to build an app. And actually, as it happens, that's how most people are making most money at the moment, is for people who are selling professional services on how to make apps. And then from an indirect perspective, you could have ads in your app, or you could, for example, sell something through your app. It could be just a front to an e-commerce site. Or you could have some sort of affiliate sales model, so that if people are doing something in your app and then they click through to a sales site, you get a kickback. And you probably can't see the details here, but you can go online, there's loads of information on this. And some of these models that I just described work better than others. And what's happening at the moment is that there's a huge trend towards, well, first of all, as I said, the people who make most money at the moment are the kind of the professional developers who kind of charge for their services, because that's the most, I suppose, reliable way to kind of do it in terms of professional services. But if you look at the other set of opportunities, for the most part, most of the most successful apps out there tend to go for a freemium model. And what you're seeing now is a trend where there's a lot more apps going into the freemium model, which would mean that it's free to download, but as you're using the app, somehow there's a prompt to buy something or to buy, rent something or do a subscription or something like that. But it's free to start with, so you get the downloads, you get your base, and then there's some sort of point at which you then sell someone something in the app. And that tends to be one of the biggest ways that the big successful apps are making their money. But there's a few other ways. When I saw this kind of chart, and this was done by a company, I think it's called Vision Mobile, but you'll see it if you just search for how to make money on apps. Things like e-commerce sales and affiliate programs are actually pretty high on there. So I was quite surprised when I saw that. So there are different ways to do that. But there's a few kind of other things. Some platforms make more money than others. So if you kind of do your classic product management stuff and you go out there and you kind of say, well, who are the most users of what platform out there? You kind of go, well, Android's 81% market share. Wouldn't that be my best target audience? And it turns out, no. It turns out that when the apps on the iOS platform still make more money than the apps on the Android platform, simply because, there's lots of debates around exactly why, but typically it's because a lot of people who are buying apps on the iOS platform are willing to spend more money, and there's more of a trend towards wanting free content from Android users, or that's one reason that's put out there. So that's an anomaly. You'd kind of think, I'll go to where the most people are, but actually it's not necessarily the case. Windows, from Microsoft, is Windows Phone is kind of coming as a third platform up there. So people who are developing for the Windows platform don't necessarily make as much money as, interestingly, iOS. But what's even more interesting is when you actually look at the people who make the most money. The people who make the most money develop for multiple platforms. So you could choose to go for iOS or Android or Windows and do one, then the other, then the other. Or if you were, and this is what the big guys are now kind of trending towards, thinking of going big and putting a lot of investment into your app, you think about, well, how do I actually set myself up so that I'm developing for all three simultaneously? And that's a kind of a common trend that's happening now in the tech world, where there are more platforms available for people that they can actually start, build it once, and then publish it to all the stores, which gives you the biggest chance of making money. And what's interesting is there are more tools now coming out to enable that. So if you're a game developer, and games would be one of the highest grossing types of apps out there, there's things like the Unity platform. So if you're building a game, you build it on top of the platform, and then you can publish it anywhere you like. You only have to build it once. And when you actually start going into, running a company that relies on app building, you kind of start thinking about maintenance. You have to start thinking about, I don't just build it once and put it out there and leave it. You have to come back and tend it and
do support on it. So it's much easier to do that on one code base than it might be on multiple code bases. So that's one. Second one is that not all app types are equal. This has gone off the top of the screen, but games earn the most by far. I have a list of the top grossing apps. You can look at the top downloaded apps, and you can look at the top most popular apps and all the rest of it on all the platforms. But if you look at the apps that make the most money, vast majority of them are all kind of games. Maybe Minecraft would be the only thing in there that wouldn't be of that ilk. But you hear about the game developers and the amount of money that some of these guys like Candy Crush King, are the guys that develop that, are pulling in, and Clash of Clans and things like that. I mean, you're talking about millions per day. They're just huge amounts of revenue. Which I suppose is an interesting point, because when you think about the amount of money and you hear about the size of the app economy, it's kind of like, sounds like this free-for-all. It's like a gold rush. Everyone get there and get some of this 63 billion euros that are meant to be coming out of the EU by 2018 in the app economy. But to be honest, the big guys are pulling in quite a lot of that money, which is, to this point, only about 20% of the apps generate 72% of the revenue. So there is a big, long tail. And that's something to be wary of, because people rush to this as an answer to how they're going to make money. But you need to think about what's been called the app poverty line, which I think is very interesting, because in the app world now, they're saying, well, you know, there's lots of great stories about people making loads and loads of money. But what's not been talked about as much is the large, long tail of people who've put a lot of effort in who aren't making any money, or at least very little money, not enough money to fulfill their dreams of moving to Hawaii or whatever. So just, you know, something to be conscious of. And in fact, Gartner put out this in January, which said less than 0.01% of consumer mobile apps will be considered a financial success by their developers through 2018. And it's partially because people aren't thinking about it to begin with. They kind of come up with an idea. They think, this is great. This is an app I'd love. But they don't really think about, well, are people going to pay money, or how do I monetize this? So they come up with the idea, they build it because they love it, and then they expect to make money. Whereas actually the people who are making money are thinking about how to make money, figuring out how to do that, and then working backwards to a kind of a case that might work for people in an area they'd like. So this was an interesting infographic I saw. It has a lot about how people aren't necessarily making as much money as you'd think. But the point that I liked about this was the developers who spend, and in particular on marketing, succeed. So if you are thinking about building an app, do not underestimate the amount of effort and money you'll have to put into marketing it to make successful. So there's a lot of talk here about how to build it. That's the first step. Once it gets out there, you need a marketing plan, and this is treated like any other business. You have to be really conscious of what you're doing to make money from a marketing perspective, and it has to be consistent. It's not just a kind of a launch, woohoo! This is, if you want to make money from your app, you have to think about your marketing plan in a long term, and that's how the successful guys do it. So I suppose when I was thinking about this then, I was saying, gosh, I'm just telling you all about how you can't make any money on apps. That's not very exciting or anything good about that. But the thing is, when you start looking at some of these trends, you kind of, and you say to people, look at the trends and maybe use these as guidelines for what makes money and what doesn't. But what I feel about that is that it actually has caused a lot of people to rush into what I would consider super saturated markets. You know, it's kind of, if I tell you that freemium models and games on iOS are the ones that make the most money, does that mean that everyone then would run to build one of those? Chances are you might. But I think the thing is that that's not where the opportunities now lie. It's really about thinking about, well, where are the gaps in the market? What's coming up that I could actually get on top of before the big guys get in there with their big guns and their big marketing budgets? And when I was thinking about that, I was thinking about my own experience. As part of my role, I have pretty much all the platforms. So I'd be looking at, you know, Android apps and iOS apps and Windows apps and comparing them all and seeing what the trends are. And I actually had a little girl about 2 years ago. I have a toddler now, obviously, 2 years old. And so one of the things I look at a lot are toddler apps. And one of the things I find is that there aren't that many. You'd think, wouldn't you? You'd think iOS, nice, friendly, kiddie apps, there should be loads of them. But to be honest, when I went looking, there are a whole load of ones that are kind of nursery rhymes from places with dodgy accents and kind of funny animations and bit of, you know, really out of tune singing. They're really awful. In fact, everyone goes every time she puts them on. Now she likes them, you know. That's not to say they're not, you know, momentarily entertaining. But really, there are very few of them that are really good in my mind in terms of what I'd expect from, for example, a gaming. You know, lots of people are building games. There's nothing targeted at toddlers. And Toca Boca, Boca is a company from the Nordics. They build a series of apps, and I will buy every single one of them. And I will pay anything you ask me to pay for them because they're brilliant. I love playing them, you know. And that's what you want from toddler entertainment. It's something that actually appeals to adults. So I think, you know, there's a gap. It's a gap in the iOS market. It's certainly a gap in the Windows market. And there's a lot of people out there who are toddler parent buying money wielding people wanting to buy stuff, and there's not a lot to service them. So there's a gap. I started talking about the fact that there's talk about the fact that the US market is stagnating in terms of revenue growth for apps. China is where it's at. So if you happen to know anyone who's got a bit of Chinese, that's where you need to be thinking about as well. So that's where the growth is in terms of revenue. So there's an opportunity. Business apps. So, you know, from Microsoft's perspective, we'd be kind of keen to I suppose, help a lot of businesses get mobile and all the rest of it. So whereas we've come late to the consumer market, we feel we've got a kind of a better affinity as well to the business market. Not a lot of business apps. Things like Door Tonic are fitting in right into a niche of people who are actually starting to look at how apps can be used for business. And that's a huge growth area in the future. And it's predicted to actually have more people above the poverty line in app building in consumer than consumer apps in the business app world. So there's an idea for people to be building an app. But the other thing I wanted to say is you don't have to be a techie to build an app. So I think, you know, it was a great introduction to the stuff that you need to think about if you are looking for a developer, and particularly if you're building a kind of a complex app, something like Door Tonic or something that where there's a lot of functionality. But if you're a person with a lot of content, you know, if you've got kind of great photos or a great blog or something, and you're thinking, how do I make that into an app? There are tools out there. I mean, with Windows anyway, there's a couple of kind of, I'd call them almost, if you're good at building PowerPoints and good transitions, you'd be pretty much able to do this. There's things called App Studio for building for phone, or Project Sienna for Windows. And they're kind of, particularly Sienna, is kind of, it reminds me of PowerPoint a bit. You kind of pull in graphics, you put a box around them, you say, it's logic like you press here, this happens. That kind of thing. And it's pretty easy. We kind of brought this to a class of students in DCU, about 300 business students, nothing to do with techie things. And we came back 3 weeks later and they'd had about 100 apps that were in store with loads of downloads. So this is something easy. So if you want to kind of try something out, but don't want to necessarily go straight to hire someone or anything like that, or pay for it to be developed, then maybe you want to try out something like that. That's another example of something that someone did. So it's just, I mean, if you've got good graphics and you've got good creative thoughts and processes, you can stick them in there and it looks pretty good. That's one that one of my colleagues built with a whole lot of just recipes. And so he just put in really nice photos and put up recipes. You click the button, the recipe plays. You can pull in YouTube videos, RSS feeds, all that kind of thing. So that's it. I just wanted to say there's plenty of opportunities still out there. Don't be put off by my early app property thing. There's still, for the right people with the right idea, I think there's still lots of money to be made. And I hope you make them. Thank you very much.